In the dying light of October 15th, 1885, the town of Copper Canyon, Arizona Territory held its breath. Not from anticipation, not from hope, but from the kind of silence that comes when good people choose to look away from evil. The Red Dog Saloon stood at the edge of respectability, a weathered two-story structure that leaned slightly to the left, as if trying to distance itself from the sins committed within its walls. Inside, the air hung thick with tobacco smoke, sweat, and the sweet, sour stench of cheap whiskey. Oil lamps cast dancing shadows across faces that had long ago abandoned shame. At the center table, 5 men sat hunched over cards that would decide more than money. Their eyes held the glassy sheen of men who had crossed too many lines to find their way back. The pot in the middle had grown beyond reason, beyond what any of them could afford to lose. But that was the nature of desperate men. They always believed the next hand would save them. Silas Brennan was the most desperate of all. At 50 years old, he looked 70. His face was a roadmap of broken blood vessels and sun damage. His hands shook even when he tried to hold them steady, and his eyes carried the vacant stare of a man who had drowned his soul in alcohol years ago and never bothered to fish it out. He wore the same filthy shirt he had worn for 3 weeks, and the smell of him caused even the other drunks to lean away. But tonight, Silas Brennan had something none of the others possessed. He had collateral that walked on 2 legs. In the corner of the saloon, pressed against the wall as if trying to merge with the wood itself, sat Elara Brennan, 21 years old, hair the color of dark honey, tangled and unwashed, hanging in front of a face she kept carefully angled toward the floor. She wore a dress that had once been gray, but was now the color of dust and desperation, patched at the elbows and hem. Her feet were bare, caked with the red dirt of Arizona, and her hands lay folded in her lap with a stillness that seemed almost unnatural. To everyone in that room, she was broken, deaf and mute since her mother died 4 years ago, a burden, a mouth to feed that contributed nothing. The town had watched her fade from a bright young woman into this silent ghost, and they had shaken their heads in pity before moving on with their lives. They had no idea she heard every word they spoke, every insult, every cruel joke, every whispered plan. For 4 years, Elara Brennan had worn silence like armor, and it had kept her alive in a world that had nothing left to offer her. The poker game had been going for 6 hours. Silas had won early, his luck riding high on a pair of aces. Then he had started drinking to celebrate. And once Silas started drinking, he never stopped until the bottle was empty or he was unconscious, usually both. By the time the clock behind the bar showed 9 p.m., Silas had lost everything he had won and everything he had brought. His pockets were empty, his credit was exhausted, and the other men at the table were tired of his excuses. That was when he turned and looked at his daughter with the eyes of a man who had sold his humanity long ago. Elara felt his gaze like a physical touch. Her stomach dropped. She knew that look. She had seen it in his eyes before, usually right before he raised his fist. But tonight, there was something different. Tonight, there was calculation. Silas pushed back from the table, his chair scraping loudly across the wooden floor. The sound cut through the low murmur of conversation in the saloon, and heads turned to watch. In Copper Canyon, entertainment was scarce. A man's downfall was as good as a stage show. Silas stumbled toward Elara, his boots dragging. He grabbed her by the upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh with the casual cruelty of someone who had never learned gentleness. He hauled her to her feet and dragged her toward the poker table like she was a sack of grain. Elara kept her face blank, kept her eyes unfocused. This was the hardest part of the pretense, when her body screamed to resist, to fight back, to run. But running would reveal the truth. Fighting would expose the lie. So she went limp, a rag doll in her father's grip, and let him drag her forward. Silas threw her against the edge of the poker table hard enough that she stumbled into it. Cards scattered. Whiskey sloshed from glasses. The four other men jerked back, startled by the sudden violence. What Silas said next would echo in Ilara's memory for the rest of her life. His voice was loud, slurred, and utterly without shame. $200, that is the bet. I am putting up the girl. She is deaf as a post and mute as a stone, but she is strong. She can cook, she can clean. She does not talk back because she cannot talk at all. A quiet woman, gentlemen. Worth her weight in gold, I would say. The silence that followed was absolute. Even in a place like the Red Dog Saloon, even among men who had committed their share of sins, there were lines. And Silas Brennan had just crossed one so blatant that even the piano player in the corner stopped mid-song. One of the men at the table, a cattle rancher named Dutch, shook his head slowly. His face was red, whether from whiskey or embarrassment was hard to tell. Silas, you have lost your mind. I run cattle, not people. Get that girl out of here before you say something you cannot take back. But Silas was too far gone, too desperate, too drunk. His eyes had the wild gleam of a cornered animal, and cornered animals do not think straight. "One hand," he screamed, raising his fist as if to strike Dutch. "Just one more hand. I can win it back. I know I can. The girl for the pot, all of it. $200. That is fair, is it not?" The other men started to stand, ready to leave. This had gone from entertainment to uncomfortable. But before they could move, before anyone could speak, the door of the saloon opened. Cold air rushed in, cutting through the stale warmth like a blade. Every head in the room turned toward the entrance, and there, filling the doorway like some figure from an old legend, stood a man who did not belong in civilized places. Caleb Stone Mercer was not a man who entered rooms quietly. At 6 feet 5 inches, he commanded space simply by existing. His shoulders were so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the doorframe. He wore a coat made from the hide of a grizzly bear he had killed himself, the fur still thick and dark, dusted with trail dirt and the faint smell of pine. Beneath the coat, leather and canvas clothing, all weathered to the same neutral brown. A Bowie knife hung from his belt on the left side, the blade long enough to gut a deer. On his right hip, a Colt .45 revolver, the grip worn smooth from use. But it was his face that made men look away. Not from ugliness, but from intensity. A thick black beard covered the lower half, long enough to reach his chest, shot through with just a few strands of gray. His hair was equally long, pulled back and tied with a strip of red leather in the Apache way. A scar ran from his left cheekbone down to his jaw, pale and raised, the kind of scar that came from a knife, not an accident. His eyes were the color of winter ice, pale blue and utterly without warmth. At 36 years old, he had the weathered look of someone who had lived 3 lifetimes in the wilderness. He looked like a man who lived where civilization ended. Caleb Stone Mercer was a legend in the territories. Born to an Irish prospector father and an Apache mother, he walked between 2 worlds and belonged to neither. He hunted in the high mountains, trapped furs, tracked outlaws for bounty, and disappeared for months at a time into wilderness that would kill lesser men in days. People whispered about him, said he could track a ghost, said he had killed 3 men with that knife in a single fight, said he was half wild himself. Most of the whispers were true. His boots, moccasins with Apache beading, made almost no sound as he crossed the saloon floor. Men shifted in their seats, suddenly very interested in their drinks. The bartender, a man named Red, who had seen his share of dangerous men, felt his mouth go dry. Caleb walked directly to the poker table. He did not look at the other men, did not acknowledge them at all. His eyes were fixed on Silas Brennan with the flat intensity of a predator evaluating prey. Then he looked at Ilara, really looked at her. And Ilara, despite every instinct screaming at her to keep her eyes down, found herself looking back. For just a second, just one heartbeat, their eyes met. And in that heartbeat, Caleb Stone Mercer saw through 4 years of carefully constructed lies. He reached into his coat and pulled out a leather pouch. The sound it made when he placed it on the table was unmistakable. Heavy, metallic. The clink of gold, not coins, real gold. When he spoke, his voice was deep and rough, like stone grinding against stone, a voice that did not waste words. $200. Gold. I am buying the girl. The room erupted, not with protest, with shock. Dutch half stood, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. The other poker players exchanged glances, unsure if they had heard correctly. Even the bartender leaned forward, trying to see if the pouch was real. Only Silas reacted with pure, undiluted greed. His eyes went wide. His hands, shaking worse now, reached for the pouch. He tore at the strings, ripping them open, and dumped the contents onto the table. Gold nuggets, at least 15 of them, ranging from the size of a pea to the size of a walnut. In the lamplight, they glowed with that unmistakable warm luster that had started wars and ended empires. Silas made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. He scooped the gold toward himself, clutching it to his chest like a child with a treasured toy. "Done," he gasped. "Done. Take her. She is yours. She is deaf and dumb, but she is strong. She will serve you well." Caleb did not respond. He simply reached down and placed one large, calloused hand on Alara's shoulder. His touch was not rough, not grabbing or pulling, just firm, guiding. Alara stood on shaking legs. She had to maintain the act, had to keep the mask in place. If she reacted to his voice, if she turned when he spoke, the entire town would know she had been lying for 4 years. They would know she had heard every secret, every plan, every betrayal spoken in front of the deaf girl. So she kept her face blank, kept her eyes unfocused, and let this stranger lead her toward the door. Behind them, Silas Brennan was already calling for whiskey, waving his newfound wealth like a flag. He did not call goodbye, did not look at his daughter one last time. He simply buried his nose in his gold and forgot she existed. The walk to the door felt like walking to a gallows. Every eye in the saloon watched them leave. Alara heard whispers, pity, disgust, relief that it was not their daughter being sold like livestock. But no one stood up, no one protested, no one said a single word to stop what was happening. That was Copper Canyon. That was the world Alara lived in, a world where good people looked the other way. Outside, the night air was cold and clean after the suffocating warmth of the saloon. The main street of Copper Canyon was dark except for scattered lamplight from windows. Most people were already home, huddled around fires against the desert cold that came fast once the sun set. Tied to the hitching post was the largest horse Alara had ever seen, a gray stallion the color of storm clouds, standing at least 17 hands high. The horse's eyes were intelligent and calm, and it turned its massive head to look at Caleb with obvious recognition. Caleb moved with efficient grace, checking the saddle straps, adjusting the saddlebags. Then, without warning, he placed both hands on Alara's waist and lifted her onto the saddle as easily as if she weighed nothing. For a moment they were face to face. His breath was visible in the cold air. He smelled of leather and wood smoke, and something wild she could not name. Up close, she could see the scar tissue around his right ear, old burn marks, the kind that came from an explosion. Then he leaned in close. So close his beard brushed her cheek, so close his lips were almost touching her ear, and he whispered 6 words that shattered her world. "Stop pretending, girl. I know you hear me." Alara froze. Every muscle in her body locked. Her heart slammed against her ribs so hard she thought he must feel it. Her breath caught in her throat. 4 years. 4 years of perfect pretense. 4 years of never slipping once. And this man, this stranger, had seen through it in minutes. Caleb pulled back just far enough to look into her eyes again. This time, there was no hiding, no mask, just pure animal terror. His expression did not change. No triumph, no anger, just that same flat, assessing stare. "I watched you for 5 days in this town," he said, his voice still low, meant only for her. "I saw you track the movements of a lizard across the street by the sound of its claws on wood. I saw you flinch when a window slammed shut 3 buildings away. I saw you turn your head to follow a conversation between 2 men behind a closed door." He paused, letting that sink in, then continued. "You can hear, Elara Brennan. You can hear better than anyone I have ever met. And where we are going, you are going to need every bit of that skill if you want to stay alive." Before she could process, before she could think of any response, Caleb swung up into the saddle behind her. His arms came around her to take the reins, caging her in against his chest. The horse, Granite, shifted beneath them but did not spook. "My name is Caleb Stone Mercer," he said, his voice rumbling through her back. "People call me Stone. I am not going to hurt you. I am not going to touch you in any way you do not want. But I bought you for a reason, and that reason is going to keep us both alive. Do you understand?" Elara wanted to speak, wanted to scream, wanted to demand answers. But her voice, unused for so long except in whispers when she was completely alone, would not come. So she nodded, just once, a tiny movement. "Good," Caleb said. Then he kicked Granite into motion, and they rode out of Copper Canyon at a steady trot, leaving behind the only life Elara had ever known. They rode for more than an hour in complete silence. The trail led north and west, climbing gradually into the foothills that surrounded Copper Canyon like the walls of a bowl. The moon was 3/4 full, providing just enough light to see the path. Granite picked his way with the sure-footedness of a horse who had traveled rough country before. Elara sat rigid in front of Caleb, her mind racing. She should be terrified. She was terrified. But beneath the fear was something else. Something she had not felt in 4 years. Curiosity. Why did this man buy her? What did he mean about needing her hearing? And, most importantly, how had he known? Behind her, Caleb seemed in no hurry to explain. He simply guided Granite up the trail, occasionally adjusting course to avoid loose rocks or overhanging branches. His breathing was steady and calm, the breathing of a man completely at ease in the wilderness. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, he pulled Granite to a stop in a small clearing. Ponderosa pines surrounded them on 3 sides, their needles carpeting the ground and filling the air with that distinctive vanilla scent. A natural shelf of rock provided some shelter from the wind. Caleb dismounted first, then reached up and lifted Elara down. She wobbled when her feet hit the ground, her legs stiff from the ride and still shaking with adrenaline. "Sit," Caleb said, pointing to a fallen log near the rock face. "I will make a fire." Elara sat. She watched as he moved through the clearing with practiced efficiency. He gathered dead wood from beneath the pines, checked each piece to make sure it was dry, and arranged them in a small teepee structure. From his saddlebag he produced a fire striker, and within 2 minutes had flames crackling to life. Once the fire was established, he pulled out a leather pouch and removed something wrapped in cloth. When he unwrapped it, Elara saw it was dried meat. Venison, from the smell. He pulled his knife, the big bowie, and used it to saw off 2 pieces. He handed her the larger one. Elara stared at the meat. When was the last time someone had given her the larger portion of anything? "Eat," Caleb said. It was not a command, just a statement. Then he bit into his own piece and chewed methodically, his pale eyes never leaving her face. Elara brought the meat to her mouth and took a small bite. It was good, smoky and salty, and better than anything she had eaten in weeks. Her father's idea of feeding her was throwing her table scraps after he had eaten his fill. This was real food, food given freely. She swallowed, her throat tight. Then, for the first time in 4 years, she spoke voluntarily in the presence of another human being. Her voice came out as a rasp, rusty and uncertain. "Why?" One word. That was all she could manage, but Caleb seemed to understand the weight of that single syllable. "Why did I buy you?" he asked. Elara nodded. Caleb was quiet for a long moment, chewing his meat, staring into the fire. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, softer, touched by something that might have been pain. 4 years ago, in the fall of 1881, there was an explosion at a copper mine called Copper Creek. It was about 15 miles from where Copper Canyon sits now. 64 people died in that explosion. Miners, support workers, families who lived in the camp nearby. He paused, his jaw tightening. My wife was one of them, Sarah, and our daughter Emma. She was 5 years old. Elara felt her heart clench. She had heard about the Copper Creek disaster. Everyone in the territory had. It had been a tragedy that made national news. But she had been only 17 at the time, and her own life had been falling apart. Her mother had just died. Her father's drinking had gotten worse. She had paid little attention to distant mining accidents. The official story, Caleb continued, his voice hardening, was that it was an accident, bad ventilation, gas buildup, just one of those tragedies that happen in mines. But I was there. I was working as a scout, helping survey new tunnels. I was on the surface when it happened. He turned to look at Elara directly. It was not an accident. I know because I saw the men who planted the explosives. I recognized one of them, and I know exactly who gave the order. Elara's eyes widened. She started to speak, then stopped, her voice failing. Judge Amos Vane, Caleb said, answering her unspoken question. He owns the Copper Creek mine, or he did before it became a mass grave. He also owns Blue Mesa Mine, which is the largest operating copper mine in the territory. He owns half the land around Copper Canyon. He owns the sheriff, the deputies, and most of the businessmen. In Copper Canyon, Judge Vane is the law. He leaned forward, his eyes intense. The reason he blew up Copper Creek was to hide evidence. Evidence of wage theft, unsafe conditions, and a dozen other crimes. 64 people died to protect his reputation and his fortune. I have spent 4 years trying to prove it. But I am one man, a half-breed Apache scout that no white court will listen to. I need proof that even they cannot ignore. Elara swallowed hard. What kind of proof? Before she died, my wife managed to get a message to me through a boy who survived. She told me where she had hidden a ledger book, a book that documented all of Vane's crimes going back to 1878. She was working as a bookkeeper at the mine, and she had been keeping records. She knew what he was doing. That is why he killed her. His voice cracked just for a second on those last words. Then he steadied himself. I have the ledger. It is hidden somewhere safe, but a ledger alone is not enough. I need a witness, someone who can testify to what is happening now, someone who can hear things that Vane and his men say when they think no one is listening, someone who can be invisible because everyone thinks she is helpless. Understanding crashed over Elara like cold water. You need someone who is deaf and mute, or who everyone thinks is deaf and mute. Yes, Caleb said. I need you, Elara Brennan. I need your ears, and I need your willingness to be brave. Elara looked down at her hands. They were shaking again, not from fear this time, from anger. 4 years. 4 years she had hidden. 4 years she had made herself small and helpless. And in that time, how many other girls had been sold like her? How many other families had been destroyed by men like Judge Vane? How many times had she heard plans being made, crimes being discussed, lives being ruined, all because people thought she could not hear? She had survived by being silent. But survival was not living, and she was so tired of just surviving. She looked up at Caleb Stone Mercer, this scarred giant of a man who had lost everything and spent 4 years hunting justice. And she made a decision that would change everything. I will help you, she said. Her voice was stronger now, still rusty, but with an edge of steel beneath. But I have one condition. Caleb raised an eyebrow, waiting. My sister, Ruth. She is 14 years old. My father will sell her next if he has not already. If we are going after Judge Vane, if we are going to bring him down, then Ruth has to be safe first, no matter what. Caleb nodded slowly. Agreed. We will make sure your sister is protected. You have my word. Then we have a deal, Elara said. For the first time, Caleb smiled. It was not a big smile, just a slight upward curve of his mouth beneath that massive beard, but it changed his face entirely, warming those cold eyes just a fraction. We are partners then, he said. Partners, Elara echoed. The word felt strange in her mouth, foreign, but also right. They finished their meal in companionable silence. The fire crackled and popped, sending sparks up into the night sky. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled, and others answered. The desert was coming alive in the darkness. When the meat was gone, Caleb stood and walked to his saddlebags. He pulled out a heavy wool blanket and brought it to Elara. We will reach my cabin tomorrow, he said. Tonight, you sleep here by the fire. I will keep watch. You are not going to sleep? Elara asked. I sleep light, Caleb said, and only when I know the area is secure. Right now, there might be men following us from Copper Canyon, men who work for your father, men who work for Vane. Until I know we are clear, someone needs to stay alert. Elara took the blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. It smelled like pine and horse and leather, but it was warm. She stretched out on the ground near the fire, using a flat section of earth as a pillow. Caleb, she said quietly, using his given name for the first time. Yes? How did you know? About me hearing? How did you figure it out when no one else has in 4 years? Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he reached up and tapped his right ear, the one with the scar tissue. 4 years ago, when Copper Creek exploded, I was 50 yards from the main shaft. The blast caught me, killed my right ear completely. Nothing but silence on this side. My left ear survived, but it rings like a church bell whenever the pressure changes or when the wind picks up. In the mountains, that is almost constant. He paused. So I learned to watch, to read lips, to notice the tiny movements people make when they hear something, the way eyes track sound, the way bodies shift. I learned because I had to, and when I saw you in that saloon, I saw all those movements. You were hearing everything. You were just very good at hiding it. Elara felt tears prick her eyes. I thought I was good enough to fool everyone. You were, Caleb said. You fooled your father. You fooled the whole town. But I am not like them. I know what it is like to lose part of yourself and have to compensate. I recognize the signs. Thank you, Elara whispered, for seeing me. Get some sleep, Caleb said. Tomorrow, the real work begins. Elara closed her eyes. She expected to lie awake for hours, her mind racing with fear and uncertainty, but exhaustion, real, bone-deep exhaustion, claimed her almost immediately. For the first time in 4 years, she fell asleep not listening for her father's footsteps, not waiting for violence, just sleeping. And in her dreams, for the first time in years, she heard her own voice speaking clearly and without fear. Dawn came to the Arizona high country like a whisper, then a shout. The sky shifted from black to deep purple to blazing orange in the span of 30 minutes, painting the ponderosa pines in shades of copper and gold. The air was crisp and thin, carrying the scent of sage and juniper, and somewhere in the distance a hawk screamed its morning greeting to the sun. Elara woke to the sound of that hawk and the crackle of a freshly stoked fire. For a confused moment, she did not know where she was. Then memory flooded back. The saloon, the gold, the stranger who had bought her and seen through 4 years of lies in 5 minutes. She sat up, the wool blanket falling from her shoulders. Her body ached from sleeping on hard ground, but it was a clean ache, not the bone-deep exhaustion of fear that had been her companion for so long. Caleb Stone Mercer sat cross-legged by the fire, his back to a boulder, his rifle resting across his knees. He looked like he had not moved all night, and perhaps he had not. His pale blue eyes tracked her movements as she stood and stretched, but he said nothing, just watched with that same assessing calm. "Coffee?" he asked, gesturing to a battered tin pot balanced on rocks at the edge of the fire. Alara nodded. She did not trust her voice yet this morning. It felt fragile, like something that might break if she used it too soon. Caleb poured dark liquid into a tin cup and handed it to her. She took it, wrapping both hands around the warmth, and sipped carefully. The coffee was strong enough to strip paint, bitter and scalding, but it was real. Her father had not bought coffee in 2 years. This simple cup felt like luxury. "We have about 2 hours' ride to my cabin," Caleb said, pouring himself a cup. "The trail gets rough in places. Granite knows the way, but you should hold on to the saddle horn when I tell you." Alara nodded again, sipping the terrible, wonderful coffee and feeling it burn life back into her chest. "After we reach the cabin," Caleb continued, "we need to talk about what happens next, about your sister, about Judge Vane, about what you are willing to risk." He paused, those ice-colored eyes meeting hers. "This will be dangerous, Alara, more dangerous than staying with your father. I need you to understand that before we go further." This time, Alara found her voice. It came out rough but steady. "I understand, and I am still willing." Something that might have been approval flickered across Caleb's scarred face. He stood, dumping the rest of his coffee onto the fire, and began breaking camp with efficient movements. Within 10 minutes, the fire was out and buried. The campsite looked untouched, and Granite was saddled and ready. They rode north and west, climbing steadily into country that grew wilder with each mile. The trail, such as it was, wound between massive boulders and stands of pine, occasionally opening onto views that made Alara catch her breath. Valleys stretched below them, painted in autumn colors, and beyond that the Copper Ridge Mountains rose like broken teeth against the sky. True to Caleb's word, there were places where the trail became treacherous, narrow passages where one wrong step would send horse and riders tumbling down slopes of loose shale, sections where they had to dismount and lead Granite around outcroppings too tight for a mounted rider. But Caleb moved through it all with the ease of someone who had traveled this path 100 times. They spoke little during the ride. But the silence was different from the silence Alara had wrapped herself in for 4 years. This was companionable, shared. The silence of two people who did not need words to communicate trust. Around mid-morning, they crested a ridge and Alara saw their destination. Nestled in a small valley, protected on 3 sides by towering pines and sheer rock faces, stood a cabin. It was not large, maybe 20 feet square, but it was solid. Built from hand-hewn logs that had weathered to silver gray, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a small covered porch facing south. Smoke curled from the chimney, which surprised Alara until she remembered that Caleb had been watching the town for 5 days. Someone else must be here. Caleb must have felt her tense because he spoke for the first time in an hour. "That is Doc Walsh. He is a friend. The only man in Copper Canyon I would trust with my life." He paused. "Or with yours." They rode down into the valley, Granite's hooves making soft sounds on the carpet of pine needles. As they approached, the cabin door opened and a man stepped out onto the porch. Doc Henry Walsh looked exactly like what he was, a physician who had lived hard and seen too much. He was 68 years old, but could have passed for 80. His hair was pure white, thinning on top, and his face was a collection of deep lines that spoke of worry and compassion in equal measure. He wore spectacles with wire frames, a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up despite the morning cold, and suspenders holding up pants that had seen better decades. In his hand he held a steaming cup, and the smell of coffee drifted across the clearing. "Stone," Doc Walsh said by way of greeting. His voice was gravelly but warm, the voice of someone who had spent a lifetime talking to frightened patients. "I see you went through with it." "I did," Caleb said, dismounting. He turned and helped Alara down, his hands gentle despite their size. "Doc, this is Alara Brennan." Doc Walsh came down from the porch, moving carefully like a man whose joints complained every morning. He stopped a respectful distance away and studied Alara with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Eyes that had diagnosed everything from measles to gunshot wounds over 4 decades of frontier medicine. "Alara Brennan," he said softly. "Little Alara, I knew your mother, child. Martha was a good woman. I am sorry for what happened to her, and sorrier still for what your father became after." Alara felt her throat tighten. Doc Walsh had treated her mother in those final weeks of consumption, had sat with them through the worst nights, had been there when Martha Brennan took her last breath, holding Alara's hand and telling her to be strong. "Thank you," Alara whispered. Doc Walsh's eyes widened slightly. Then understanding dawned, followed by something that looked like vindication. "So it is true," he said, looking at Caleb. "She can speak. She can hear too," Caleb said. "Better than anyone I have ever met, which is why we need your help, Doc." The 3 of them moved into the cabin. Indeed, it was simple but well organized. A stone fireplace dominated one wall with an iron stove for cooking built into it. A rough table and 2 chairs sat in the center of the room. Against the far wall was a bed frame with a rope lattice and straw mattress covered with furs and wool blankets. A ladder led up to a sleeping loft under the peaked roof. Shelves lined every available wall space, filled with supplies: canned goods, ammunition, tools, books, and what looked like medical equipment. Doc Walsh poured coffee for all of them, and they sat at the table. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Caleb laid out the situation with the same methodical precision he used for everything else. He told Doc about buying Alara, about the plan to use her abilities to gather evidence against Judge Vane, about the ledger Sarah had hidden before she died, and about the most immediate problem, Ruth Brennan. "The girl's sister," Caleb said. 14 years old. Still living with Silas Brennan. We need to get her to safety before we do anything else. If Vane or his men learn what we are planning, they will use her against us." Doc Walsh listened without interrupting, his weathered hands wrapped around his coffee cup, his face grave. When Caleb finished, the old doctor was silent for a long moment. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. "I had hoped," he said slowly, "that someone would stand up to Vane eventually. But I confess I never thought it would be you, Stone. You have good reason to want revenge. Perhaps too good." "This is not revenge," Caleb said, though his voice was tight. "This is justice." "Is there a difference?" Doc Walsh asked gently. "Yes," Alara said. Both men looked at her. She met their gazes steadily. "Revenge is about making yourself feel better. Justice is about making sure it does not happen to anyone else." Doc Walsh's expression softened. He reached across the table and patted Alara's hand. "Your mother would be proud of you, child. You have her wisdom." He turned to Caleb. "Very well, I am in. What do you need from me?" "Information first," Caleb said. "What do you know about Judge Vane's current operations? The Blue Mesa mine specifically. Who works there? How many guards? What are the conditions?" Doc Walsh stood and moved to one of his shelves. He pulled down a worn notebook and flipped through pages covered in cramped handwriting. "I have been keeping my own records," he said. "Nothing as thorough as Sarah's ledger, I am sure. But I am the only doctor for 50 miles, which means I treat everyone, including Vane's men, and miners who get hurt. And sometimes, when they think I cannot hear or do not care, people talk." He returned to the table and opened the notebook to a specific page. "Blue Mesa Mine employs about 200 men officially, but my count puts it closer to 250. The extra 50 are not on any payroll. They are Apache and Mexican mostly, some Chinese. Vane uses them for the most dangerous work. He does not pay them wages, just room and board. It is slavery in everything but name." Alara felt cold rage building in her chest. She had heard whispers about the conditions at Blue Mesa, but hearing it stated so plainly was different. "How many children?" she asked. Doc Walsh looked at her with sad eyes. "At least 30, maybe more. Children whose parents are working there, or children taken from families who could not feed them. Vane claims he is being charitable, giving them jobs and food. But I have treated some of those children. They work 12-hour days in conditions that would break grown men. Why does no one stop him? Elara demanded. Why does the law do nothing? Because Vane owns the law in Copper Canyon, Doc Walsh said. The sheriff answers to him. The deputies are on his payroll. Even the territorial government looks the other way because Vane contributes to political campaigns. He paused. There is one exception, a federal marshal named John Pike. He has been investigating corruption in the territory for 2 years, but he needs hard evidence, evidence that will stand up in court. That is where the ledger comes in, Caleb said, and where Elara comes in. We need to get inside Blue Mesa, get proof of what is happening now, not just 4 years ago, and we need to do it in a way that does not get everyone killed. There might be a way, Doc Walsh said slowly. Vane is always looking for workers at the mine, especially for the kitchens and laundry, women who will work for almost nothing. If Elara were to apply for work there, as a mute girl desperate for employment, she might get hired. And once inside, she could listen, learn, find evidence. Elara felt her heart rate spike. The thought of walking into the lion's den, of surrounding herself with Vane's men, was terrifying. But it was also the only plan that made sense. I will do it, she said before fear could change her mind. Caleb shook his head immediately. Too dangerous. I will not send you in alone. You cannot go with me, Elara pointed out. Vane knows your face. If you show up at Blue Mesa, you will be shot on sight. But me? I am just the deaf girl from Copper Canyon. No one will pay attention to me. She is right, Stone, Doc Walsh said. And if we are careful, we can set up protections, ways for her to signal if there is trouble. I could introduce her myself as someone looking for work. That would give her credibility. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue. His jaw was clenched tight enough to crack stone, and his hands had formed fists on the table. But finally, reluctantly, he nodded. We do this carefully. No unnecessary risks. And first, before anything else, we secure Ruth. Doc Walsh nodded and made a note in his book. I will make arrangements with Father Miguel Santos. He runs the Catholic mission in town. If we can get Ruth to him, she will be safe. Vane may control the sheriff, but even he hesitates to make an enemy of the church. The rest of the day was spent in preparation. Caleb taught Elara the layout of the cabin, showing her where supplies were kept, how to work the stove, where the weapons were stored. He treated her like a partner, not a burden, explaining everything with patient detail. Around noon, Caleb took Elara outside to teach her how to shoot. He set up tin cans on a fallen log about 30 yards from the cabin and handed her the Winchester rifle. Hold it like this, he said, adjusting her grip. His hands were warm and calloused against hers, strong but gentle. Butt tight against your shoulder or the recoil will hurt. Look down the sight. Breathe out slowly. Squeeze the trigger. Do not pull. Elara followed his instructions. The rifle was heavy in her hands, the metal cold despite the afternoon sun. She sighted down the barrel at the first can, took a breath, let it out halfway, and squeezed. The rifle cracked like thunder. The recoil slammed into her shoulder hard enough to make her stumble back a step. 50 yards away, the tin can flew off the log in a spray of dirt and metal. Good, Caleb said. There was approval in his voice, genuine and warm. Natural instinct. You barely hesitated. Most people freeze up their first time. They practiced for another hour. By the end, Elara could hit 4 out of 5 cans consistently, and her shoulder was going to be one massive bruise by tomorrow. But she felt something she had not felt in years. Capable, strong, like maybe she was not just a victim waiting to happen. When the ammunition was exhausted, they sat on the porch steps together. The sun was starting its long slide toward the western mountains, painting the valley in gold and amber. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. It was a comfortable silence, the kind that only comes between people who are beginning to trust each other. You were married, Elara said finally. It was not a question. I was, Caleb said, for 7 years. Best 7 years of my life. What was she like, Sarah? Caleb was quiet for so long that Ilara thought maybe she had overstepped. But then he began to speak, his voice softer than she had heard it before. She was smart, smarter than me by a long way. Could read and write in 3 languages, kept the mine's books better than any accountant Vane ever hired, which is why he wanted her working there. She had this way of seeing through to the heart of things, seeing what people needed, not just what they said they wanted. He pulled something from his shirt pocket, a small leather folder, worn smooth by handling. He opened it and showed Ilara a photograph. The image was faded, but Ilara could make out a woman with dark hair pulled back, intelligent eyes, and a slight smile. Next to her stood a little girl with wild curly hair and her mother's smile. They looked happy. They looked loved. Emma was 5 when she died, Caleb said. She wanted to be a teacher, used to line up her dolls and teach them their letters. His voice cracked slightly. She never got the chance to teach anyone. I am sorry, Ilara said. The words felt inadequate, but she meant them with her whole heart. Me too, Caleb said. He closed the folder and tucked it back into his shirt. Every day for 4 years I have been sorry, but sorry does not bring them back. All I can do is make sure Vane pays for what he did, make sure no other families have to go through what we went through. That is why you are doing this, Ilara said. Not for revenge, for them. For them, Caleb agreed, and for everyone else Vane has hurt. He looked at her, including you and Ruth. Ilara felt something shift in her chest. This man, this scarred warrior, was fighting for people he had never met, fighting so that other daughters would not be sold, other sisters would not be enslaved, other families would not be destroyed by greed. Tell me about the explosion, she said quietly. If you can, I need to understand what we are up against. Caleb stared at the distant mountains for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was distant, like he was watching events unfold from far away. It was October 20th, 1881, a Tuesday. I was working as a scout for the mine, mapping new tunnels. Sarah was in the main office with Emma, finishing up the day's accounts. Most of the miners were still below ground on the evening shift. He paused, his jaw working. Around 6 in the evening, I heard the first explosion. It came from deep in the mine. Then another. Then a third. The ground shook like an earthquake. I ran toward the mine entrance, but before I got there, the main shaft exploded outward. The blast wave threw me 30 feet. That is when I lost my hearing on this side. He touched his scarred right ear. When I came to, the mine entrance had collapsed. There was fire everywhere. Smoke so thick you could not see 5 feet. People were screaming. I dug with my bare hands trying to get to the office building. But the whole structure had collapsed into the mine shaft below. His voice went flat, emotionless. The tone of a man who had told this story so many times, it no longer felt real. It took 3 days to put out the fires, another week to dig out the bodies. 64 people died. Sarah and Emma were among the first we found. They never had a chance. Ilara reached out and took his hand. He did not pull away, just held on, his grip tight enough to hurt, like she was the only thing keeping him tethered to the present. I am sorry, she whispered again, knowing it was not enough, knowing nothing would ever be enough. The official investigation ruled it an accident, Caleb continued. Gas buildup, they said. Poor ventilation. Just one of those tragedies that happen in mining. But I knew better. I had seen 3 men entering the mine 2 hours before the explosion. Men I recognized as Vane's personal security. They were not miners. They had no reason to be there. Did you tell anyone? I tried. But I was just a half-breed scout. The territorial marshal at the time was on Vane's payroll. The newspapers printed the official story and moved on. Within a month, it was like it never happened. Vane reopened under a new name at Blue Mesa. Most of the same workers, same conditions, same corruption, just a different location. And Sarah's ledger? Before she died, Sarah managed to get a message to me through a boy who survived. His name was Thomas, only 12 years old. He had been running errands for Sarah that day, delivering messages. When the explosion started, he ran. Smart kid. Caleb's expression softened slightly. Thomas found me in the hospital, told me Sarah had given him something to hide weeks before the explosion, said if anything happened to her, he was supposed to give it to me. It was the ledger, 4 years of records, every bribe Vane paid, every safety violation he ignored, every worker who died because of his greed. Sarah documented all of it. "Where is it now?" Elara asked. "The ledger?" Caleb smiled, a grim expression without humor. "Somewhere Vane will never find it, somewhere safe until we need it." Before Elara could ask more, the sound of hoofbeats echoed across the valley. Both of them stood immediately, Caleb's hand dropping to his revolver. But then they recognized the rider, Doc Walsh, returning from town. The old doctor's face was grim as he dismounted. He did not wait for pleasantries. "We have a problem," he said. "A big one." Inside the cabin, Doc Walsh delivered the news that changed everything. He had gone to Copper Canyon to make arrangements with Father Miguel Santos, the Catholic priest who ran a small mission and school. The plan had been simple. Tonight, while Silas Brennan was drinking himself unconscious at the Red Dog Saloon, they would extract Ruth and bring her to the safety of Father Miguel's mission. But when Doc Walsh and Father Miguel arrived at the Brennan house to scout the situation, they found the front door standing open. Inside was chaos, furniture overturned, broken dishes, blood on the floor, still wet. Ruth was gone. Elara felt the world tilt beneath her feet. Caleb's hand shot out to steady her, gripping her arm. "Where?" Caleb demanded. "Where did they take her?" Doc Walsh pulled a crumpled piece of paper from his pocket. His hand shook slightly as he handed it to Caleb. This was on the table, weighted down with a knife stuck into the wood. Caleb read it aloud, his voice flat and cold. "Mercer, the girl is at Blue Mesa. Come alone with the ledger, or she dies. You have 3 days, Judge Vane." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Elara heard a sound that took her a moment to recognize. It was coming from her own throat, a keening animal sound of grief and rage. "No," she whispered, then louder. "No, no, no, Ruth." Her baby sister, Ruth, who was only 14 years old. Ruth, who still believed in goodness despite everything. Ruth, who had stayed behind when Elara left because someone had to, and Elara had been too much of a coward to take her along. Now Ruth was in Judge Vane's hands, in a mine where children were worked to death and nobody cared. "This is my fault," Elara said. Her voice was hollow. "He took her because of me, because I left with you. He is using her to get to you." "No," Caleb said firmly. "This is Vane's doing, not yours. He is a monster who uses whoever is convenient. If it was not Ruth, it would be someone else." "That does not help her," Elara said. Tears were streaming down her face now, hot and bitter. "That does not get her back." "Then we will get her back," Caleb said. "We will go to Blue Mesa, and we will bring her home." "How?" Elara demanded. "He has 200 men, guards with rifles, towers, walls. How can 3 people possibly raid a fortified mine and rescue 1 girl?" "The same way we planned before," Doc Walsh said. His voice was steady, the voice of a man who had delivered bad news to desperate people for 40 years and learned how to offer hope anyway. "Elara goes in, not as a raider, as a worker, someone looking for employment." "That is insane," Elara said. "If Vane knows who I am, he will kill me on sight." "He does not know who you are," Doc Walsh pointed out. "Think about it. Did anyone in that saloon know your name, your face? You kept your head down the whole time. After 4 years of being invisible, most people in Copper Canyon do not really see you anymore. You are just the deaf girl." Forgettable, Elara thought back. It was true. She had perfected the art of being unnoticed. Even the men at the poker table had barely looked at her. "Father Miguel can take you to Blue Mesa tomorrow," Doc Walsh continued. "He often brings workers there, people from his congregation who are desperate enough to take any job. You will be one more face in the crowd, just another mute girl looking for work." "And once I am inside?" Ilara asked. "You find Ruth," Caleb said. "You figure out where they are keeping her, what the guard rotations are, where the weak points are, and you wait." "Wait for what?" "For Marshal Pike," Doc Walsh said. "I will ride to Tucson tonight. Pike has been building a case against Vane for 2 years. If I show him what evidence we have, tell him about the children being held at Blue Mesa, he will have to act. Federal marshals have jurisdiction over territorial judges. He can override any of Vane's bought sheriffs." "How long will that take?" Ilara asked. 3 days, Doc Walsh said. "Maybe 4. Pike will need to gather deputies, get the paperwork in order, make the raid official so nothing can be challenged in court later." 3 days, Ilara repeated. The note said Vane would wait 3 days before killing Ruth. It was not enough time, but it was the only time they had. She looked at Caleb, really looked at him, saw the tension in his jaw, the way his hands had curled into fists. He wanted to charge in, wanted to grab his rifle and his knife and storm Blue Mesa tonight. Consequences be damned. It was written in every line of his body, but he was holding back because he knew a suicide mission would not save Ruth, would not stop Vane, would just add more bodies to the count. "You said we are partners," Ilara said to him. "We are," Caleb confirmed. "Then trust me to do this. Let me go into Blue Mesa. Let me find Ruth and gather evidence. And when Marshal Pike arrives, we will end this together." Caleb studied her face for a long moment. Then slowly, reluctantly, he nodded. 3 days, he said. "You have 3 days. If Pike has not acted by then, I am coming in, whether it is smart or not. I will not let Ruth die because we were being cautious." "Agreed," Ilara said. Doc Walsh stood and moved to his medical bag. He pulled out several items and laid them on the table. A small cloth bundle containing bandages, a brown bottle of laudanum, and a tiny folding knife barely 2 inches long when closed. "These are for you," he said to Ilara. "The knife fits in your boot. The laudanum can ease pain or help someone sleep, depending on the dose. The bandages speak for themselves. Do not let anyone see these. If they search you, you are just a poor girl with basic medical supplies." "Thank you," Ilara said, tucking the items into her dress pockets. "There is one more thing," Doc Walsh added. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small silver cross on a chain. "This belonged to my wife. She died 15 years ago. I have carried it ever since." He placed it in Ilara's palm and closed her fingers around it. "For luck, or faith, whichever you believe in more." Ilara felt the weight of the cross, still warm from Doc Walsh's body. It was a tangible reminder that she was not alone, that people were depending on her, that Ruth was depending on her. "I will bring it back," she promised. "Just bring yourself back," Doc Walsh said. "The cross is only silver. You are irreplaceable." Doc Walsh left an hour later, riding hard for Tucson and Marshal Pike. The sun was setting, painting the valley in shades of orange and purple. Ilara and Caleb stood outside the cabin, watching him disappear down the trail. "You should eat something," Caleb said, "and try to sleep. Tomorrow will be hard." They went inside. Caleb prepared a simple meal of beans and salt pork, which they ate mostly in silence. Every few minutes Ilara would catch him looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. Worry, certainly, but something else too, something that made her heart beat faster. After dinner, Caleb pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil. He drew a rough map of Blue Mesa Mine from memory, marking buildings and guard positions. "This is what I remember from when Sarah worked there," he said. "It may have changed, but the basic layout should be the same. The main mine entrance here, processing building here, bunkhouses along this side, kitchen and mess hall here." He pointed to a small square near the center of the compound. "If they are keeping Ruth anywhere, it will probably be in the supervisor's quarters. That is where Vane stays when he visits. It is separate from the main buildings, more secure, but you need to be careful. Do not go looking for her right away." Establish yourself first. Learn the routines. Become invisible again." "I know how to be invisible," Ilara said quietly. "I know you do," Caleb said. "But this time you need to be invisible while actually paying attention, listening, gathering information. It is a different kind of hiding." He was right. For 4 years, she had made herself invisible by tuning out the world. Now she needed to be invisible while taking in everything. It was a harder balance. "What if I cannot find her?" Ilara asked. "What if they have her somewhere I cannot reach?" "Then you come back and tell me," Caleb said, "and we adjust the plan. But I do not think they will hide her too carefully. Vane is using her as bait. He wants me to know where she is. He wants me to come charging in. That is the whole point of taking her." It made sense in a horrible way. Vane had not taken Ruth to hide her. He had taken her to draw Caleb out. "He does not know about me," Ilara said slowly. "He does not know you have someone who can get inside." "Exactly," Caleb said, "and that is our advantage. As long as you stay in character, as long as they believe you are just another desperate worker, you will be safe." They talked for another hour, going over details, discussing contingencies. Finally, Caleb stood and gestured to the loft. "You should sleep up there. It is warmer. I will keep watch down here." "You need to sleep too," Ilara protested. "I will sleep when you are safe," Caleb said. His tone left no room for argument. Ilara climbed the ladder to the loft. She lay down on the straw mattress, pulling the wool blankets around her. Below, she could hear Caleb moving around, banking the fire, checking the rifle. She expected to lie awake all night, her mind racing with fear and what-ifs. But exhaustion, real bone-deep exhaustion, claimed her almost immediately. Her last conscious thought was of Ruth. "Hold on," she thought fiercely. "Hold on, Ruth. I am coming." When she woke, pale dawn light was filtering through the gaps in the logs. She climbed down to find Caleb making coffee, his face drawn with exhaustion. He had not slept at all. "Father Miguel will be here soon," he said, handing her a cup. "Are you ready?" Ilara wrapped her hands around the warmth and nodded. She was not ready. She would never be ready. But Ruth did not have time for her to be ready. They heard the wagon before they saw it. Father Miguel Santos arrived just as the sun cleared the eastern ridge. He was a man in his early 50s, with dark hair going gray at the temples and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. He wore the simple black cassock of a Catholic priest, dusty from the road. "Miss Brennan," he said, climbing down from the wagon, "I am sorry we meet under such circumstances, but I promise you we will do everything in our power to bring your sister home." "Thank you, Father," Ilara said. Father Miguel turned to Caleb. "Marshal Pike is a good man. If Doc Walsh reaches him, he will act. You have my word." "Your word is good enough," Caleb said. He looked at Ilara. "Can I have a moment alone with her before you go?" Father Miguel nodded and walked a discreet distance away. Caleb took both of Ilara's hands in his. His grip was warm and strong, and she could feel calluses from a lifetime of hard work. "You listen to me," he said. "You are the bravest person I know, but courage without caution is just stupidity. Keep your head down. Do your job. Wait for the right moment. Do you understand?" "I understand," Ilara said. "And if it goes wrong," Caleb continued, his voice urgent now, "if you get caught, or if Vane realizes who you are, you tell him everything. You tell him where I am. You tell him about the ledger. You give him whatever he wants. Your life and Ruth's life are worth more than any revenge." "You said this was not about revenge," Ilara reminded him. "It is not," Caleb said. "But if I have to choose between justice and keeping you safe, I choose you. Every time." The raw honesty in his voice made Ilara's breath catch. This man, this scarred warrior who had lived alone in the wilderness for 4 years, hunting the man who killed his family, had just admitted he cared whether she lived or died. Without thinking, she stood on her toes and kissed his cheek. Just a brief touch of lips to scarred skin, but she felt him go still, felt his breath catch. "I will be careful," she whispered, "and I will bring Ruth home. I promise." She climbed into the wagon beside Father Miguel before she could change her mind. As they pulled away, she looked back once. Caleb stood in front of the cabin, one hand raised in farewell, looking like some ancient guardian carved from stone and determination. Then they rounded a bend in the trail, and he was gone. The ride to Blue Mesa took 2 hours. Father Miguel kept up a quiet stream of instruction, telling Ilara what to expect, how to act, what signals to watch for. "Your name is Maria Gonzalez," he said. "You are from across the border. You speak no English. You are mute from birth. You are desperate for any work. Can you remember that?" "Yes, Father," Ilara said. "When we arrive, let me do all the talking. Keep your eyes down. Look frightened. It will not be hard, I think. Most people who go to Blue Mesa are frightened." Around mid-morning, they crested a low rise, and Blue Mesa Mine came into view. It was larger than Ilara had imagined. A sprawling complex of buildings clustered around the dark mouth of the main mine shaft. Bunkhouses, a mess hall, storage sheds, a massive ore processing building with smokestacks that painted the sky with dark smudges, guard towers at each corner with men carrying rifles visible even from this distance. This was not just a mine. It was a fortress, a kingdom ruled by one man's greed and cruelty. And somewhere inside those walls was Ruth. The wagon rolled through the main gate. The guards barely glanced at them. A priest and a poor girl were not threats. Father Miguel drove to a low wooden building marked office. He helped Ilara down, and together they walked inside. The foreman was a thick-necked man in his 40s, with a face like weathered leather and eyes that held no sympathy. His nameplate read Briggs. "Father," Briggs said without warmth, "what brings you here?" "I have brought a worker," Father Miguel said. "Maria Gonzalez. She is mute, but a hard worker. She can cook, clean, whatever you need." Briggs looked at Ilara with the same expression he might give a horse he was considering buying. "Mute, you say? She understand anything?" "She takes direction well," Father Miguel said. Briggs grunted. "We need kitchen help. Last girl burned herself on the stove. $1 a week. Room and board. She works 6 days, Sundays off. Take it or leave it." "We will take it," Father Miguel said. Briggs scrawled something on paper and handed it to Ilara. "Give this to Hattie in the kitchen. Big woman, hard to miss. She will put you to work." Just like that, Ilara was inside. Father Miguel squeezed her shoulder once, briefly, then left. She watched him go, fighting the urge to run after him. Then she turned and walked deeper into Blue Mesa Mine, into the heart of darkness, to find her sister and bring down an empire of evil. "Hold on, Ruth," she thought. "I am here now. Just hold on a little longer." The kitchen at Blue Mesa Mine was hell rendered in iron and flame. 3 massive wood-burning stoves lined one wall, their fires stoked so hot the metal glowed cherry red in places. The air was thick with smoke, steam, and the smell of burned meat. Pots the size of washtubs bubbled with beans and stew meant to feed 200 hungry men. The heat was suffocating, turning the room into a furnace that made breathing feel like swallowing hot sand. Hattie, the head cook, was exactly as described. A mountain of a woman, 6 feet tall and nearly as wide, with arms like tree trunks and a face that had forgotten how to smile sometime around the turn of the century. She wore a stained apron over a dress that had once been blue, but was now the indeterminate gray of something that had been washed and worn until color became irrelevant. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and her eyes were small and hard, like chips of flint. She looked at the paper Ilara handed her, then looked at Ilara with the same assessing coldness the foreman had shown. "Another one," Hattie said. Her voice was surprisingly high for such a large woman, almost girlish, which made it somehow more unsettling. "Father Miguel brings me girls. They last maybe a week before they run off or get hurt. You gonna be any different?" Ilara kept her face blank, her eyes down, said nothing, could say nothing. Hattie waved a massive hand dismissively. Right, mute. Well, that might actually be useful. I am tired of girls who cry and complain. You cry? Ilara shook her head. Good, because there is no crying in my kitchen. You work. You keep your mouth shut, which I guess is easy for you. You do what I say when I say it. You understand? Ilara nodded. Then get over to that sink and start washing. We got 200 men coming in for lunch in 3 hours, and those pots from breakfast are not going to clean themselves. The sink was a long wooden trough with a hand pump at one end. Next to it was a mountain of pots, pans, plates, and utensils, all crusted with the remains of the morning meal. The water that came from the pump was cold and had a metallic taste that suggested it came straight from the mine itself. Ilara rolled up her sleeves and got to work. The lye soap burned her hands within minutes. The cold water made her fingers ache. But she scrubbed and rinsed and stacked, keeping her head down, becoming invisible in the way she had perfected over 4 years. But this time, while her hands worked, her ears were wide open. Hattie talked constantly while she cooked, a running commentary of complaints and observations directed at no one in particular. Most of it was mundane. Complaints about the quality of the meat, worries about running out of flour, curses directed at the stoves when they did not heat evenly. But occasionally, between the mundane complaints, there were nuggets of information. Damn supervisor moved them kids again, Hattie muttered while stirring a pot of beans. Used to be in bunkhouse 3. Now they are in the old storage building near Vane's quarters. More work for me, having to send food over separate. Ilara's hands paused for just a fraction of a second, then resumed scrubbing. The old storage building near Vane's quarters. That was where they were keeping the children. That was where Ruth would be. 2 other women worked in the kitchen alongside Hattie. One was a Mexican woman named Consuela, maybe 40 years old, with tired eyes and hands that never stopped moving. The other was younger, perhaps 18, Chinese, who Hattie called May, though Ilara suspected that was not her real name. Neither woman spoke much, and when they did, it was in quiet voices meant not to disturb Hattie's constant monologue. Around 11 in the morning, a man came to the kitchen. He was dressed better than most of the workers, in a clean shirt and vest, and he carried a ledger book under one arm. He had the look of a clerk, someone who worked with numbers rather than his hands. "Hattie," he said, "the judge is coming for inspection tomorrow. He wants the children presentable. Make sure they get fed properly tonight. He is bringing investors, wants to show them the operation." "The judge can go to hell," Hattie said without looking up from her cooking. "But fine, I will make sure the brats get extra portions. Anything else his lordship requires?" The clerk's face tightened at the disrespect, but he did not rise to the bait. "Just make sure everything looks proper, clean, organized. The judge does not like mess." After he left, Hattie spat into the fire. Judge Vane and his investors, coming to see his little empire, makes me sick, but I do what I am told. I need this job, God help me. She turned and saw Ilara watching. "What are you looking at, girl? Those pots are not going to wash themselves." Ilara quickly returned her attention to the sink, but her mind was racing. Judge Vane was coming tomorrow, with investors. That meant security would be tight. But it also meant Vane would be distracted, focused on impressing his guests. The lunch service was chaos. 200 men filing through the mess hall in shifts, holding out tin plates to be loaded with beans, salt pork, and hard bread. Hattie ladled portions with mechanical efficiency, while Consuela and May handled the bread and coffee. Ilara's job was to keep the pots full and the serving line supplied, running back and forth between the kitchen and the serving counter. She kept her eyes down, her face blank, but she was watching everything: the layout of the building, the doors and windows, the patterns of movement, and, most importantly, the men themselves. Most of them ignored her completely. To them, she was just another piece of furniture, no more worthy of attention than the tables or benches. But a few looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl, assessing eyes, hungry eyes, eyes that said women were fair game in a place like this. One man, a burly miner with a face full of scars, reached out and grabbed her wrist as she passed. "Hey," he said. His breath smelled of tobacco and rot. "You new? You got a name?" Elara tried to pull away, keeping her face frightened and confused, playing the part of the mute girl who did not understand. The man laughed. "Deaf and dumb, huh? Well, that is convenient. Maybe I will come find you later. See if the rest of you works, even if your mouth does not." Before he could say more, a ladle cracked across his knuckles with enough force to make him yelp and release Elara's wrist. Hattie stood over him, her massive bulk somehow having crossed the room silently, her face dark with anger. "You touch my kitchen girls again, Garrett, and I will put this ladle somewhere the sun never shines. You understand me?" Garrett rubbed his knuckles, glaring, but he nodded. "Just having some fun." "Have your fun elsewhere. Now get out of my kitchen before I decide you do not need to eat today." Garrett left, muttering curses. Hattie turned to Elara. "You all right, girl?" Elara nodded, rubbing her wrist. "Good. Now get back to work. And stay away from the miners when you can. Most of them are decent enough, but some are animals. You remember that." The unexpected protection surprised Elara. Hattie was harsh and demanding, but apparently she had some code of conduct. In a place like Blue Mesa, even that small kindness felt like a miracle. After lunch service ended, Elara was assigned to prepare vegetables for dinner. Mountains of potatoes that needed peeling, onions that made her eyes burn, carrots that had seen better days but were still edible if you cut away the bad parts. She worked at a table near a window that looked out onto the main compound. From here, she could see the comings and goings of the mine. Guards changing shifts at the towers, miners emerging from the shaft, their faces black with soot, wagons carrying ore to the processing building. And there, on the far side of the compound, separated from the other buildings by 100 yards of open ground, stood a two-story structure that was clearly the supervisor's quarters. It was better built than the bunkhouses, with real glass in the windows and a covered porch. Guards were stationed at the front door, 2 men with rifles. Next to the supervisor's quarters was a smaller building, single-story. That must have been the old storage building Hattie mentioned. No guards were visible at its door, but Elara noticed that every hour a guard would walk from the main quarters to the storage building, check something, then return. That was where they were keeping Ruth. She was sure of it, but how to get there? The compound was large, but there was no cover between the kitchen and that building. Anyone crossing that open ground would be visible from the guard towers. And even if she made it there, the door was probably locked, and any attempt to break in would raise an alarm. She needed to think, needed to plan. But most of all, she needed information. As the afternoon wore on, Consuela came to work at the table beside Elara, chopping onions. The older woman worked in silence for a while, then spoke quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You are the one Father Miguel brought?" Elara glanced at her, then nodded. "He is a good man, the only good man in this whole cursed place." Consuela paused. "You are not really mute, are you?" Elara felt her heart skip. She kept her face blank, questioning. Consuela smiled sadly. "I have worked in kitchens my whole life. You learn to notice things. The way you turn your head when someone speaks behind you. The way you respond to sounds. You can hear perfectly well. You are just pretending." For a moment, Elara considered maintaining the deception. But something in Consuela's face stopped her. This woman knew suffering, knew what it meant to survive by any means necessary. She would understand. Elara leaned close and whispered so quietly that even someone 5 feet away would not hear. "Please, do not tell anyone." Consuela's smile grew a fraction warmer. "Your secret is safe with me, child. God knows we all have secrets here. Mine is that I can read and write, which would get me killed if Vane knew. An educated Mexican woman is dangerous in his eyes." "Why do you stay?" Elara asked, still whispering. My son. He works in the mine. 15 years old. If I leave, they will work him to death. At least while I am here, I can make sure he eats properly, can slip him extra food when I can. Elara felt a surge of kinship with this woman, another mother protecting her child in the only way available. My sister, Elara whispered. Ruth, 14 years old. I think they are keeping her in that storage building. Consuela's face went very still. Then she nodded slowly. The children's building. Yes, that is where they keep the ones they want to keep separate, the pretty ones, the ones Vane's investors want to see, clean and presentable, to show how charitable he is. Can you tell me about it? The building? How many children? How it is guarded? Consuela glanced around to make sure no one was paying attention. Hattie was across the room, shouting at May about something. The coast was clear. 20 children, Consuela said. Maybe 25. They rotate them. Some go to work in the mine when they turn 13 or 14. New ones come in to replace them. It is supervised by a woman named Agnes. She is cruel, enjoys the power. The guards check every hour, but they do not go inside unless there is trouble. How do I get in there? Elara asked. You do not, Consuela said firmly. The only people allowed in that building are Agnes, the guards, and Hattie when she delivers food. If you try to go there, you will be caught. And if you are caught, you will disappear. That is how it works here. People who cause problems just disappear. Elara felt frustration building in her chest. Ruth was so close, maybe 100 yards away, but she might as well be on the moon for all the good it did. When does Hattie deliver food there? She asked. Consuela thought for a moment. Twice a day. Breakfast around 7 in the morning. Dinner around 6 in the evening. She loads a cart with pots of food, pushes it across the compound. The guards let her in. She leaves the food for Agnes to distribute. Then she comes back. An idea began to form in Elara's mind. It was dangerous. But everything about this situation was dangerous. Could I take the cart for her? Make the delivery? Why would you do that? Consuela asked, suspicious. Because I am new. Because Hattie might trust me with simple tasks. Because I need to see my sister and know she is alive. Consuela studied Elara's face for a long moment. Then she nodded, understanding. You are brave or foolish, maybe both. But I will help you if I can, not today. Hattie does not trust new workers that quickly, but in a few days, maybe, if you prove yourself useful. Thank you, Elara whispered. Do not thank me yet, Consuela said. You might not like what you find in that building. Hope can be more dangerous than despair sometimes. The dinner service that evening was similar to lunch, though the men seemed more tired, more irritable. There were a few scuffles in the mess hall, quickly broken up by guards. One man collapsed at his table, apparently from heat exhaustion, and had to be dragged outside. Through it all, Elara worked mechanically, keeping her face blank, her movements efficient. She was beginning to understand the rhythm of this place. The brutal, grinding routine that turned people into machines. Wake, work, eat, sleep, repeat. Day after day until something broke. Body or spirit or both. After dinner, Hattie loaded a cart with large pots of beans and stew. She added a basket of bread that was slightly less stale than what the miners got. Then she pushed the cart toward the door. Consuela, you clean up here. May, start prep for breakfast. The new girl can help me with delivery. Elara's heart leaped. This was it. A chance to see the building, to maybe see Ruth. She hurried to help Hattie push the heavy cart across the compound. The evening air was cooler than the kitchen, but still warm, and the sun was painting the western sky in shades of orange and red. Guards watched from the towers, but they did not challenge two women delivering food. As they approached the storage building, one of the guards from the main quarters walked over. "Evening, Hattie," he said. He was young, maybe 25, with a thin mustache and nervous eyes. "Evening, Charlie," Hattie replied. "Got the evening meal here. Kids need to eat." "Judge is coming tomorrow," Charlie said. "Agnes has them all cleaned up and ready. They look almost human." "They are human, you damn fool," Hattie snapped. "They are children." Charlie shrugged uncomfortably. "Just saying. Anyway, go ahead. Agnes is expecting you." He unlocked the door and stood aside. Hattie pushed the cart through and Elara followed, her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone must hear it. The inside of the storage building had been converted into a dormitory. 2 rows of narrow bunks lined the walls. A table and benches sat in the center. There was a single window, barred, and a door at the back that presumably led to a washroom, and sitting on those bunks or standing near the table were the children. They ranged in age from perhaps 8 to 15. Boys and girls both. Mexican, Apache, Chinese, white. The diversity was striking, but what struck Elara most was how quiet they were. No playing, no laughing. Just silent faces watching the adults with wary eyes. A woman emerged from the back room. Agnes was perhaps 50 years old, thin to the point of gauntness, with gray hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her face. She wore a black dress that looked like mourning clothes, and she carried a wooden rod about 2 feet long. Not a walking stick, a weapon. "About time," Agnes said. Her voice was sharp and nasal. "These brats have been whining about being hungry for an hour." "Then maybe you should feed them on time," Hattie said. There was no warmth in her voice when addressing Agnes. Elara barely heard the exchange. Her eyes were scanning the faces of the children, searching desperately for Ruth. There were so many of them, and they all looked so thin, so frightened. And then she saw her. Ruth sat on a bunk in the far corner, her arms wrapped around her knees, her face turned toward the wall. Even from across the room, Elara could see the bruises on her arms. Her hair, which had always been Ruth's pride, was tangled and dirty. She looked smaller than Elara remembered, as if the last few days had physically diminished her. Elara's first instinct was to run to her sister, to throw her arms around her, to promise that everything would be all right. But she forced herself to remain still, forced herself to keep the blank expression on her face. One wrong move, and she would blow everything. Hattie began setting out the food on the table. "Line up orderly," Agnes commanded, tapping her rod against the floor, "and no fighting over portions, or you will all go hungry." The children formed a line with practiced efficiency. This was routine for them. Ruth moved with the others, but slowly, as if every step hurt. As she passed Elara, their eyes met for just a fraction of a second. Recognition flared in Ruth's eyes, then confusion, then desperate hope. Her mouth opened, about to speak. Elara shook her head the tiniest movement, almost imperceptible. "Please," she thought. "Please understand. Do not say anything." Ruth closed her mouth. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not speak. Just looked at Elara with an expression that broke Elara's heart into 1,000 pieces. Then she moved on, took her bowl of food, and returned to her bunk. "Who is this?" Agnes asked, noticing Elara for the first time. "New kitchen girl," Hattie said. "Helping me with the cart. She is mute, so she will not be gossiping about what she sees here." "Good," Agnes said. "The less people know about this place, the better. Judge Vane wants these brats kept separate, clean and fed just enough to look healthy for the investors, but not so well treated that they get ideas about deserving better." The casual cruelty of the statement made Elara want to scream, or better yet, to grab that wooden rod from Agnes and beat her with it until she understood what it felt like to be helpless. But she did neither, just stood there blank-faced, as if she understood nothing. After the children had been served, Hattie collected the empty pots and loaded them back onto the cart. "Come on, girl. We got work to do back in the kitchen." As they left, Elara glanced back one more time. Ruth was watching her, hope and fear warring in her young face. Elara tried to communicate reassurance with her eyes. "I see you. I am here. Hold on." Then the door closed between them, and they were back outside in the fading light. "That Agnes is a viper," Hattie muttered, as they pushed the cart back toward the kitchen. "Gets pleasure from making those kids miserable. I have seen her hit them with that rod for nothing, for looking at her wrong, for breathing too loud. If there is justice in this world, she will burn in hell. It was the most emotion Alara had heard from Hattie. Apparently, even the harsh head cook had her limits when it came to cruelty. Back in the kitchen, the cleanup from dinner service took another 2 hours. By the time everything was washed and put away, Alara's hands were raw and her back ached from standing. But she had seen Ruth, had confirmed her sister was alive. That knowledge gave her strength. Hattie showed Alara to the women's bunkhouse after the kitchen was finally clean. It was a long, low building that smelled of unwashed bodies and stale air. Rows of narrow bunks, most already occupied by sleeping women. Hattie pointed to an empty bunk near the door. "That is yours. Breakfast prep starts at 5 in the morning. Be in the kitchen by then, or you will not eat. There is a washroom at the back, but the water is cold and you get 5 minutes. Any longer and someone will drag you out. Understood?" Alara nodded. "Good. Now get some rest. Tomorrow will be harder than today." Alara lay down on the thin mattress, not bothering to undress. Around her, women snored and shifted in their sleep. But despite her exhaustion, Alara could not sleep. Her mind was too busy, planning, calculating. Ruth was alive. She was being held in that building with 20 other children. Agnes was the guard, cruel but predictable. The building was checked by external guards every hour. Hattie delivered food twice a day. And tomorrow, Judge Vane himself would be visiting with investors. Somewhere in all of that, there had to be an opportunity, a moment when the guards were distracted, when Vane's attention was elsewhere, when she could get Ruth out. But how? And more importantly, where would they go once they escaped? The mine was surrounded by desert. They could not run far on foot. And any escape would immediately be noticed, bringing down Vane's entire security force on their heads. She needed help, needed Caleb and Marshall Pike to arrive, needed the raid that Doc Walsh had promised. 3 days, Vane had said in his note. This was day 1, 2 more days to wait. If she could just keep Ruth safe for 2 more days, help would come. Hold on, she thought. Both of us just need to hold on. Sleep finally came in the darkest hours before dawn, fitful and troubled. Alara dreamed of Ruth calling for her, of trying to run, but her legs would not move, of doors that opened onto nothing but darkness. She woke to rough hands shaking her shoulder. One of the other women, her face lined and tired. "Kitchen girl. Time to work. Hattie does not like lazy." Alara stumbled from the bunk, splashed frigid water on her face in the washroom, and hurried through the pre-dawn darkness to the kitchen. Her body ached from yesterday's labor, but there was no time to nurse soreness. The work did not stop for pain. Hattie was already there, as if she never left, stoking the fires to roaring life. "Coffee," she barked. 20 pounds, and do not spill the beans, they cost money." Alara ground coffee beans while her mind churned through possibilities. Today, Vane would arrive with his investors. Security would be heightened, but everyone's attention would be on impressing the visitors. That might create opportunities. Around 6 in the morning, unusual activity began outside. Wagons arrived carrying crates. Guards took up positions at intervals around the compound. The supervisors emerged from their quarters wearing cleaner clothes than usual, faces freshly shaved. "Big show today," Consuela murmured as she worked beside Alara preparing biscuits. "Vane wants everything perfect. He is trying to get more investment money, wants to expand operations." "More operations means more children," Alara whispered back. Consuela's face was grim. "Yes, that is how it works. He shows them the clean, well-fed children, says he is rescuing them from poverty, gives them jobs and education. The investors see charity. They do not see the mines, the long hours, the ones who get hurt or sick and just disappear." At 7, Hattie prepared the breakfast cart for the children's building. But this time, she did not ask for help. "I will take this one myself," she said. "The judge likes everything just so. Cannot risk a new girl messing it up. Lara watched from the window as Hattie pushed the cart across the compound. The timing was the same as yesterday, 15 minutes from departure to return. Around 10 in the morning, Judge Amos Vane arrived. Lara had never seen him before. In Copper Canyon, Vane was spoken of in whispers, a name more than a person. But now she saw him in the flesh, and she understood why people feared him. He was not physically imposing. Perhaps 5 feet 10 inches, slender, with gray hair slicked back with pomade and a neatly trimmed beard shot through with silver. He wore an expensive black suit with a silk vest, a gold watch chain visible across his middle, and boots polished to a mirror shine. At his hip hung a small revolver in a tooled leather holster, more for show than use. But it was his eyes that marked him as dangerous. Cold gray eyes that assessed everything with the calculating gaze of a man who saw people as resources to be exploited or obstacles to be removed. There was no warmth there, no compassion, just cold arithmetic. He moved through the compound with the confidence of a king inspecting his domain. Behind him came 4 men in city clothes, clearly investors from back east. They wore uncomfortable expressions, like men who had stepped into a world they did not quite understand but were trying to appear knowledgeable. Vane's voice carried across the compound as he explained his operation. "Gentlemen, what you see here is the future of mining in the territories. Efficient, profitable, and most importantly, sustainable. We employ over 200 workers, provide housing and meals, and maintain the highest safety standards." The lies flowed smoothly from his mouth. Lara watched from the kitchen window, her hands clenched into fists. This man had killed Caleb's family, had enslaved children, had built an empire on suffering, and here he was, being praised for it. The tour wound through the compound, the ore processing building, where the investors marveled at the machinery, the mine entrance, where they peered into the darkness but did not descend, the workers' quarters, which had been specially cleaned for the occasion, and finally, around noon, they approached the children's building. Hilara's breath caught. This was it. They were going to see Ruth, going to see all the children Vane claimed to be helping. The group disappeared inside. They stayed for perhaps 20 minutes. When they emerged, the investors were nodding, seeming impressed. One of them clapped Vane on the back, clearly convinced by whatever they had been shown. Vane had won them over, made slavery look like charity, turned exploitation into benevolence. The rage that built in Alara's chest was white-hot and barely containable, but she forced it down, forced herself to keep working, to maintain the mask of the obedient, mute girl. Revenge would come, justice would come, but not yet, not today. The investors departed in the early afternoon, their wagons rolling back toward civilization and comfort, leaving Vane's hell behind them none the wiser. But Vane himself did not leave. His personal carriage remained in front of the main quarters. He was staying overnight, Lara realized, which meant security would remain tight through tomorrow as well. That evening's dinner service was even more chaotic than usual. Some of the miners had gotten into the whiskey supply and were drunk and belligerent. Fights broke out in the mess hall. One man threw a plate at another, missing and shattering it against the wall. Guards had to drag 3 men out bodily and lock them in a storage shed to cool off. Through it all, Lara worked mechanically, her mind elsewhere. Tomorrow was day 2, one more day after that, and help should arrive. But could Ruth last that long? Could any of them? After dinner, Hattie loaded the cart for the children's building. "New girl, you help me again. These old bones are tired today." They pushed the cart across the compound in the gathering dusk. The air had cooled slightly, bringing relief from the day's heat. Above them, the first stars were beginning to appear in a sky that was turning from blue to purple to black. Inside the children's building, the scene was heartbreakingly familiar. Agnes with her rod, children lining up in silence, the smell of fear and resignation. But something was different tonight. Agnes seemed nervous. She kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone. As Hattie set out the food, Agnes spoke, her voice lower than usual. "The judge wants to see one of the girls tonight, the blonde one. Ruth, I think her name is, says he has questions about her family." Elara felt ice flood her veins. She forced herself to keep her face blank, to show no reaction, but inside, terror was screaming. Vane knew. Somehow he knew who Ruth was. Maybe he had put together that a 14-year-old girl named Ruth Brennan had disappeared from Copper Canyon the same day Caleb bought her sister. Maybe one of his spies had reported back. However it happened, he knew. And if he knew about Ruth, how long before he figured out that Maria Gonzalez, the mute kitchen worker, was actually Elara Brennan? Hattie was oblivious to Elara's internal panic. "Ruth, come get your dinner," she called. Ruth approached slowly. When she got close enough, Elara did something desperate. As she ladled stew into Ruth's bowl, she let her hand shake deliberately, spilling some onto the floor. Then she bent to wipe it up, bringing her face close to Ruth's, and whispered so quietly that only Ruth could possibly hear, "Do not go with Vane. Whatever happens, do not go alone with him." Ruth's eyes widened. She opened her mouth to respond. "Keep moving, brat," Agnes snapped. "Others are waiting." Ruth moved on, but Elara had seen her nod. The tiniest acknowledgement. She understood. Back in the kitchen, Elara's mind raced. She had to do something. Had to act. Waiting for Marshal Pike was no longer an option. If Vane interrogated Ruth tonight, if he used his methods to get information from a terrified 14-year-old girl, everything would unravel. But what could she do? She was one woman, alone, in a compound full of armed guards. Even if she managed to get Ruth out of the building, where would they run? The desert would kill them as surely as Vane's men. Unless she could get to Caleb, get word to him that they needed help now, not in 2 days. As if reading her thoughts, Consuela appeared at Elara's side. "Something is wrong," she said quietly. "I can see it in your face. What happened?" Elara glanced around. Hattie was across the room. May was focused on her work. They had a moment of privacy. "Vane wants to see my sister tonight. He knows who she is. If he questions her, she might tell him about me, about Caleb, about everything." Consuela's face went pale. "Then you need to leave, tonight, before he connects you to her." "I cannot leave Ruth. If you stay, you will both die," Consuela said urgently. "At least if you leave, you can bring help back. You said there were people coming, a marshal. Let them handle this. They are not supposed to arrive for 2 more days. Then you go to them, find them, tell them the situation has changed, that they need to come now." It made terrible sense. Elara staying here accomplished nothing if Vane discovered who she was. But if she could reach Caleb, if she could tell him that Ruth was in immediate danger, he would act. He would do something, plan or no plan. "How do I get out?" Elara asked. "The gates are guarded. The towers have men with rifles. They will see anyone trying to leave." Consuela thought for a moment. "The supply wagons. They come every 3 days with food and equipment. One is scheduled to leave at dawn tomorrow, heading back to the staging depot 20 miles south. The drivers load tonight and sleep in their wagon. If you could hide in the cargo, they would search it. Not if you hide in the right place. The wagons carry barrels of salt pork packed in brine, heavy barrels that would take 2 men to lift. They never check inside those." Elara felt hope kindle, then immediately die. "I would drown in brine, or suffocate." "Not if the barrel is mostly empty. Sometimes the barrels get damaged in transit, leak out half their contents. Those barrels get sent back to be refilled. If you could get into one of those—" It was insane. Cramming herself into a barrel, hoping it was one of the ones being returned, hoping she could breathe through the gaps in the lid, hoping no one discovered her before the wagon was miles away from Blue Mesa. But it was the only plan they had. "Where are these wagons?" Elara asked. "Storage shed near the south gate. 3 wagons already loaded. The one on the right is the one leaving at dawn. I know because my son helped load it this afternoon. Can you get me there? Consuela hesitated, then nodded slowly. After the kitchen closes for the night. Around 10. Everyone will be in the bunkhouses. I can say I am taking you to show you where supplies are kept, if anyone asks. Thank you, Elara said. Thank you for risking this. Do not thank me yet. This could get us both killed. But I have watched Agnes hurt children for too long, watched Vane destroy lives for profit. If there is a chance to stop it, even a small chance, I have to take it. The hours until 10 felt like years. Elara worked mechanically, cleaning up from dinner service, preparing what she could for breakfast. All the while her mind was on Ruth. Was Vane with her now? Was he interrogating her? Hurting her? She touched the small silver cross around her neck, hidden beneath her dress. For luck or faith? She needed both. At 10, the kitchen finally closed. Hattie dismissed them for the night. May headed toward the bunkhouse. Elara started to follow, but Consuela caught her arm. Come with me, girl. I need to show you where we keep the flour stores. You will be getting it yourself tomorrow. They walked toward the storage shed. The compound was dark, except for lights in the guard towers. Most of the workers were in their bunks, exhausted from another brutal day. The storage shed was unlocked, as Consuela had said. Inside, 3 wagons sat loaded and ready. The one on the right was marked with chalk, Depot Return. In the back of that wagon were 4 large barrels, each as tall as Elara's waist. Consuela checked them quickly, tilting each slightly. 3 sloshed with liquid, the 4th made almost no sound. This one, she whispered. Most of the brine leaked out. There is maybe 3 inches left in the bottom, enough to look normal if someone glances at it, but not enough to drown you. Elara looked at the barrel. It seemed impossibly small, claustrophobic, a coffin with a lid, but it was her only chance. Help me, she said. Together, they lifted the lid off the barrel. The smell hit Elara immediately. Rancid meat and spoiled brine, stomach turning, but there was room inside, just barely. Elara climbed up and lowered herself in, feet first. The barrel was just wide enough for her to fit if she pulled her knees up to her chest. Her feet touched the slimy brine at the bottom, cold and disgusting. The walls pressed against her shoulders. Can you breathe? Consuela whispered. Elara tested. There were gaps around the lid where the wood had warped. Not much air, but some. Enough, maybe. Yes, she said. Her voice echoed strangely in the confined space. Then God be with you, child. When you get out, bring help. For Ruth. For my son. For all of them. I will, Elara promised. I swear it. The lid came down, cutting off the moonlight. Darkness absolute. The smell overwhelming. The sound of her own breathing deafening. And then Consuela's footsteps fading away. Elara was alone in the dark, cramped and terrified, betting her life and Ruth's on a desperate gamble. All she could do now was wait for dawn. Wait for the wagon to roll. Wait for freedom or death, whichever came first. Hold on, Ruth, she thought in the darkness. Hold on just a little longer. Help is coming. I am coming.